Hi, this is Midge Ingersoll, and Midge, we are here today at the Handsell Historic Home in Dorchester County, where we're celebrating the Nanticoke Indians.
Welcome to Handsell. Since this is your first time, we'll talk a little bit about the history of the plantation and the house. The area that we're standing in now was a very early Native American village, dating back actually thousands of years here. And it was first encountered by Europeans in 1608 when John Smith did his first circumnavigation of the Chesapeake. When he came up the Nanticoke River into what is now the Vienna area, he discovered a village with as many as 200 warriors, and that's according to his journals. And it has been pretty much agreed upon by most of the native people that we've talked to in this area and the history and the research that this was in fact one of the largest tribes on the entire eastern shore. That this location was sort of the heart or the capital, so to speak, of the native tribes that were here on the Delmarva Peninsula. So John Smith, of course, arrived and waves of English people started coming, causing conflict between the native people and the early English settlers. The native people were eventually pushed off the land, although prior to that it was set aside as a Native American reservation, Indian reservation according to the Maryland colonies, and it was a reservation for almost 70 years. But the English continued to encroach. They kind of didn't pay attention to that whole thing. And continued to build houses here and inflict their own culture onto the natives. So the native people either went north up into the Pennsylvania, Canadian, Iroquois Nation, or many just stayed in Dorchester and assimilated into both black communities and white communities in the lower Dorchester or lower Wycomico County. By 1770, there were very few native people here. So the English family at the time that thought they owned this Handsell plantation, which was kind of arrogant of the English to think that they could have a land grant right smack dab on top of a native village, but that's the way it was. So they applied to the colonies to have the reservation dissolved and to turn this plantation that had been called Handsell, meaning earnest money or money handed at market, because it had been a trading post between the early English and the native people here at Chacon. So by 1770, the reservation was dissolved, and the owners of the Handsell plantation at that time was Henry Steele, who was the Englishman, wealthy, was a merchant, and he had married a local girl here, Ann Billings, who had inherited money on her own, being the only surviving child of wealthy parents. So they amassed their fortune. They owned, together by the Revolutionary War, they owned about 8,000 acres in Dorchester County and about 91 enslaved people. So they built a large grand plantation house here, 5-bay, Georgian colonial, and it was 40 feet long here and another 16 feet deeper than what you see today, and another story and a half taller. So it was 2.5 stories and another 16 feet deep. We've just done ground penetrating radar and archaeology in the back, and have uncovered the rest of the original foundation and the rest of the original basement behind the house. We also know by various forensic study of the house, archaeological forensics, I guess we'd call it, that the house was indeed another story and a half taller. So all of that collapsed to the rear because of some devastation still yet to be unknown. We know that the British were here twice, or 3 times in Vienna, twice in 1781. And during one of those times, Weston below here was destroyed by the British, and we believe Rehoboth up creek was also, the Marshy Hope, was also hit by the British. So it's sort of puzzling that they wouldn't have come here, but we don't have actual documentation. Why would they come here? Because Henry Steele, as I said earlier, was English. He came over here in the 1750s. He was a merchant and he was wealthy, and he had become an American patriot. He was financing the revolution, and he served in the Maryland delegation first in the House of Burgesses and later on in the House of, as a delegate. So he's exactly the kind of guy that the British would have wanted to attack. Like they attacked his business partner, John Henry, down at Weston. They probably would have come here as well. But as I say, we don't have documentation of that. It's just one theory of what may have happened to this house. We know that there was a devastation that caused a fire here. The house partially collapsed to the rear, and that's why we have this large debris field in the back. But the front wall and the two side walls remained standing up to the first floor level. And they remained in ruins for many, many, many years. And by then the Steele family had pretty much left the Vienna area. One brother moved to Cambridge. Everybody else went up to Annapolis and later on to Annapolis and Baltimore. Nobody ever came back here to Vienna to live. So they were deriving income from the land because they owned the land. We presume they had overseers here because they continued to have enslaved people here working on this plantation. So the Steeles owned the plantation until 1837. When Mom died, they sell the plantation, and a local fella named John Sheehy purchases the 484 acres of Handsell with this ruined house on it. At that point, he decides he has a new young wife and 4 young children. It's his second wife. He needs a home for them. He takes these 3 ruined walls, he puts a back on it and an A-frame, and he makes the house into this configuration that we see today. So the interior of this house and this rear wall are all from 1837. But the front wall, if you look at it, is 20 inches thick. The brick on the outside is a fine grapevine mortar, beautifully done, brickwork, some Flemish bond brick in there, lovely, including the 2 sides, front and 2 sides. Look at the rear wall, not so nice. This one's still holding its plaster. It's 20 inches thick, it's solid, well built. This was done out of used bricks by someone of probably a little less wealth, less affluence. But he built a house out of the ruins and created what we see today and lived here with his family of 6, wife and 4 children. Everybody that has owned Handsell from the 1600s up to the Civil War enslaved African Americans here. There was an African American community here as early as 1600 with the first slave we know of. Her name was Nan, and she was owned by John Ryder. Nan appears again in a later census of Ryder's heirs as Old Nan. So we can almost follow her life from when she was purchased in the 1600s to when she died, probably in the middle of the 18th century. It's quite moving. If you go into the basement area is our kitchen, and the kitchen fireplace and what the remnants of the oven are from the 18th century house. So we know that was the original interior kitchen of the house, even when it was a grander, bigger plantation house. We have then a chamber down there, which we're representing as Rachel Jackson's chamber. She's listed in the 1870 census as being the house servant here to the Thompson family. Again, 5 or 6 family members, white family members living here in these 4 rooms and 2 hallways. And then Rachel, of course, being the house servant, she would have done the laundry, the cooking, probably a small garden, and took care of the family. So she lived downstairs, so we have a space reserved for her. So here at Handsell, we're not a historical society. We're trying to do this a little differently, try to tell the story of the 3 cultures who have lived here at Handsell, starting with, of course, the native people who lived here for thousands of years, then the European English settlers on this level, and then in the basement, we represent the African American story. So we hope to go forward in the future with more programming. We're doing our first program workshop today with the basket workshop. And that's the Center for Basketry Research from Baltimore has come down today to run our basket workshop. We're excited about that. They're making a small tobacco basket. We'd love to do native basketry in the future and African. Might get some gully geechee baskets going on up here would be exciting too, so that we can show how how similar we really were. Every culture in this world has made baskets.
Mitch,
And that's,
excuse me, do you have any documentation about the slave families who lived here? I would assume that there are people who still live in this area who were descendants from
yes,
the
we
families.
do. We actually have a group of African American descendants of several families that lived here: the Jacksons, the Pinders, there were Jollies, Robinsons. This whole community in the 20th century was a vibrant African American community. Their families were largely sharecroppers who lived here. There's only actually one or two white families that lived here. Everybody else was African American. They worked on this greater farm, which is now about 1,500 acres, I think, altogether. And Shirley Jackson is downstairs in the kitchen right now, and she is a direct descendant of Charles Jackson, who was born a slave in 1814, and we have his whole family traced. We also have panels downstairs of the database that we have started of the African American families, but particularly of the enslaved community of Handsell, and I have 205 names on that list. And they are individuals who were owned either by people who owned Handsell or by relatives or people who would have inherited them at the time of their death. So of that 205 people, they may not have worked here directly on this farm, but they would have worked on other farms owned by members of that family. So we have 205 names. We have a letter downstairs that talks about the enslaved community, written by one of the mistresses of the house, talking about illnesses in the what they called the quarters, which of course would have been the slave quarters. And there's a letter down there that you can read. So again, the basement, we tell more the African American story. This level, we tell more what life would have been in the 19th century, in this case in 1837. I'm dressed more 1830s and 40s. Downstairs, their interpreters are dressed more 18th century.
And could you tell us, is there a wharf? Is the property contiguous with the Nanticoke River?
The property is contiguous with, the original Handsell was contiguous with the Nanticoke River and the Chacon Creek. Our property now is not, but we do have a right-of-way still down to the Chacon Creek. And the Chacon Creek would have been a tender access to the larger ships, which would have been in the Nanticoke. So when this plantation was thriving, they would have used the Chacon Creek with small barges. It's narrow and windy, but it's very deep. I've paddled it. I've been up in a small boat with an engine, so you can get in there in a small boat. Also, there's a very large canal just north of here that comes directly straight in from the Nanticoke River. You can see it on Google Maps, and people do paddle and boat in there now. But it's a straight line, so everybody's pretty certain that it was hand dug. It was probably dug by enslaved people, and they believe it might have been a logging operation. Our research has shown that there was a mill located someplace very near here. We don't know whether it was on that canal, on the river, or on this Chacon Creek, but it was called Ryder's Mill. And then later on, Ryder's daughter married Billings, James Billings, and then there was a Billings Mill. So we think Ryder Mill and Billings Mill might have been the same place, the same location. So there's a lot of, the more we know, the more questions we have. And going back to the Native American story too, which I know you're interested in, we are trying to compile a list of Native people from old documents, going back to the early 1700s, or even in the 1600s, actually, it turns to 16 1700s. There's a lot of documents at the Maryland colonies that list Native people who signed agreements with English folks or put in complaints about English encroachment and whatnot. And we've started a list of the names, because they're people we know were here. You know, and if that can help Native Americans today who are still in the area trace their genealogy and do all that, maybe that'll be helpful. So, like the database for the African Americans, to start one of early Native names that we know were in this area.
What kind of names would they have had? that they would have written
As
down?
far as the Maryland archives goes, the state of Maryland recognizes 4 names that are Native American. That's Abbott, Robbins, Tall, and
Ashquash and Kahanki is one, I think. Some of the really early names, they would have been true native names, I think,
Correct.
that they were using. Then eventually all that was anglicized, because probably a native girl married an abbot. And
Correct.
that's how that happened. So what happened often to the early English settlers came and they didn't come with women, they came on their own. And the native people were here. So a lot of them married native girls, but they changed their names. It might be just Elizabeth or Rebecca, or they gave them a Christian name. And that's why we lose, but we're not able to trace it, because it says, so William Abbott, for example, may have married Rebecca. Well, Rebecca might have been a native girl. So her native name has been lost to history because they changed the records. Early on, it was just the colonies, and it was their paper. They had a legislature, sort of House of Burgess, and it was a place that the native people here at Chacon could go to put a complaint in, for example. Once the reservation was set, they had a right to go and say, this is happening here. And the colonies twice did side with the native people. But, as I said, who's down here policing this? Nobody's coming down from Annapolis to make sure that things are going well for the native people. And so it just fell apart pretty quickly. But, you have a civilization that was here for thousands of years, and in less than 100 years it was gone. So we all should remember that.
And the different Indian tribes, could you tell us what they are, please?
You can help me with this a little bit, but I can tell you today we have Pocomoke's here.
Pocomoke is here. The Nanacoke tribe out of Delaware is here. I'm with the Nassau-Wawash, and we are the remnants of the Choptank, Nanacoke, and Potomac Indians from the state of Maryland. No.
I see. Okay, it's fascinating. Thank you. Shirley, we're here today at Chicone, which is also known as Handsell, and we're celebrating the Native American Indians' culture. But you're going to tell us another story because you're here in the kitchen, in the basement of Handsell. Could you tell us what's happening here?
In the basement today, we are serving a Native American meal. Consists of 3 Sisters soup, corn pudding, succotash, hominy, bluefish, smoked bluefish, boneless.
Yum.
Smoked bluefish. It's duck.
It's duck?
Yes.
Yum.
And also sunflower seed cakes.
I've never heard of sunflower seed cakes.
Sunflower seed cake and carrot bread along with sassafras tea or peppermint tea
Oh, yum.
with smoke, I don't mean smoke, hickory coffee. You have a choice.
And Shirley, are you related to any people who grew up in this area?
I am the ancestor of Rachel Jackson, Charles and Rachel Jackson, who was a slave on this property. And that would be my great-great-great-grandmother, Rachel would be.
And have you lived in this area for a long
I
time?
lived in this area back in mid-30s and early 40s.
And then did you leave?
We left but we didn't move far, but my family still stayed here. I had other relatives who lived on this farm until 1989.
Wow. Well, tell us how you feel being in this kitchen with this fire going right behind you. It's a cold day, right?
It's sort of a chilly day, but it's a wonderful feeling to have so many people come down in the kitchen to partake of our Native American food that we prepared for them today.
Well, I really enjoy eating all of these wonderful things you've all prepared. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Spirit Wolf. And you're from the Pocomoke Indians, Joan. Could you tell us what you're doing here today?
I'm grinding corn. First I put the kernels of corn in there and mash them, then I take the bigger mortar or pestle and grind it like that to a fine powder.
And Joan, this kind of corn, is this corn that people eat or that animals eat?
Well, what I'm using, animals eat it because it's field corn.
Field corn.
Yeah. But you can eat it when it's ground, make it into cornbread or because
nice.
it's cornmeal actually. It's like you buy in a store.
I just had some wonderful corn pudding inside there.
That's what I made for Easter Sunday.
You did? It was delicious. And then we had succotash. Did that corn come from a farm close by?
Well, that's beans and corn, and it wouldn't be field corn. It would be like sweet corn.
Oh, okay. And we had some wonderful smoked bluefish and some duck. Where did the duck come from?
The water.
It didn't fly away.
No.
And we're here, it's called Chacon.
Yes.
And how is that related to the Pocomoke Indians?
Well, I think there might have been a reservation here. It was a reservation. I don't know a whole lot of history about that area myself because I'm not from this area.
Where are you from?
Pocomoke Forest.
Pocomoke Forest. How far away is that?
About an hour.
Oh, okay. So are you living on a reservation?
No, there's no reservations now in Maryland on Eastern Shore.
Oh, okay. Did your family live on a reservation at one time?
Well, in the 1600s, there was the Parahocon Reservation out in the Pocomoke Forest, and my great-great-great-grandfather and grandmother lived there.
Wow. And how many of your family are still living in that area?
Well, it's not a whole lot of us left. See, besides myself out there, I'm about the only one.
Aww.
The rest of them, in different towns around here, but.
And how do you celebrate Easter then? Do you have some traditions that are particularly Pocomoke related? No?
No. Native Americans didn't celebrate Easter.
What holidays did they celebrate?
They didn't have holidays.
No holidays at all? No. It wasn't until the Englishmen came and
Right.
said
All
we have to
white
have
man.
holidays.
Yeah, we had feast.
Yeah.
Celebrated something somebody might have done that was like a warrior that had, or they had gone to war with another tribe or something and they had won it. Some of the women maybe had done something real special that would be celebrated.
What would a woman have done that was special besides being herself, of
I
course?
wasn't born then. I don't know. Oh,
Having children. That would have been something to celebrate, right?
yeah.
Was an Indian family large or on the smaller side?
Probably large.
Were there more than one wife and husband?
I don't think so. Not here.
No.
Can't quote me on that.
Okay, well, thanks so much.